It's good to have you with me as we continue our journey through the Psalms. We've reached Psalm 13. It's a short, concise, punchy psalm, one of the briefest psalms we have in our Bibles. And although it reflects many of the themes we've already looked at in the first part of the Psalms, there's the shortness, the brevity of this psalm, I think, lends a particular power to it, as David very concisely and clearly lays out what's on his heart. The psalm falls into three clear two-verse sections, and I always like to sum up each section in a way that helps me remember it and distill the truth. So let me give you a couple of options here. 1 and 2 would be the complaint, 3 and 4 would be the cry, 5 and 6 would be the confidence. Or you could use a different alliterative outline, and you could have 1 and 2 is the agony, 3 and 4 is the appeal, 5 and 6 is the assurance. What comes out for me particularly in this psalm is the intensity of David's emotions. David, although the leader of his people, a mature Christian in a good relationship with God, he knows the times of deep torment and despair, what we would call today spiritual depression, what the theologians sometimes like to call the dark nights of the soul. And no believer in God is immune from that, however mature or experienced you may be. And I want to suggest to you today that if you've never known a time like that, you will as a Christian. It's part and parcel of being a Christian in the world in which we live. So look at first of all at the first two verses, and 4 times in these 2 verses he cries out with these rhetorical questions. He feels forgotten by God, feels abandoned, and he feels this deliberate. God is deliberately hiding his face. That means he's withdrawn the sense of his presence. And how terrible that is. We can cope with our trials and we can cope with the opposition if we know and we feel and are assured that God is with us. But to go through that with God having turned his face away from us, with God having deliberately withdrawn the felt sense of his presence. So in the apparent absence of God, David is left simply to wrestle with his own thoughts. And you and I know how negative and often self-destructive that exercise can be, as we simply take counsel with our own hearts. And of course, David also feels, how long shall my enemy be exalted over me? So his enemies are triumphing, they're gloating, they're taking advantage of the fact of God's apparent absence. And this is going on for a period of time. How long? It's almost like, how much longer? This is not a brief experience. How long? And then verses 3 to 4, you get his appeal, his cry for deliverance. Take note of God. Consider. Become aware of what's going on. It's not that he doesn't think God isn't aware. It's just he feels that God isn't aware. So now he's asking God to get involved, to intervene in a way that he can be aware of and confident. Give me life and light. But look at the motivation too. Lest my enemies say I have prevailed over him. Lest my foes rejoice because I am shaken. You see, this isn't only about David. God's honor is tied up with and identified with his servant's deliverance. If David goes under, God is dishonored. The enemies rejoice. It's a bit like Moses' appeal to God in the Old Testament, as God says, I'm going to wipe this people off the face of the earth because of their lack of faith and belief in me to go into the promised land. And Moses says to God, but if you do that, your enemies will gloat. They'll say, you couldn't do it. You couldn't bring them into the promised land. So his motivation is very important. It's not purely for his own sake. And then you get verses 5 and 6. You get the anticipation and the assurance and the confidence that he expresses in God. It's a trust in God's unfailing, steadfast, or chesed, the covenant love of God. And look at the future tense. My heart shall rejoice. I have trusted, so my heart shall rejoice. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. It's an answer. It's an assurance of answered prayer and an anticipation that not only is God going to deliver him, but he is going to return thanks to God for his deliverance of him. So the faith shines through even in the midst of the agony and the despair. Some commentators have pointed out here, and this is beyond my natural ability, I can assure you, some commentators have pointed out here that the psalm gets shorter as it goes along, those 3 sections. So the first 2 verses are, I think, 5 lines in the original. The second 2 verses are 4 lines in the original. The third little section is just 3 lines in the original. And as if the storm is raging, and then gradually the storm calms to little more than a ripple at the end. So I call this particular psalm the calm after the storm. The calm after the storm. And whatever your experience as you're listening to and watching this, maybe it's turmoil, maybe it's a tsunami of trouble, maybe there's a deepest trough of depression you can identify with. I want to assure you the same God who came to David's aid, if you are a child of his, will also come to your aid in his time, in his way, and of that you can be sure. Until the next time, the Lord bless you and the Lord keep you.